Hey guys, Zane from the Infinite Jukebox here with another album review, and today I wanted to talk about the new Smino record, Love for Rent. Love for Rent is the latest studio album from the Chicago-based rapper as well as singer-slash-songwriter and singer Smino, an individual who, although always a big name within the Chicago rap scene since he first debuted a number of years ago, it has always been overshadowed by his peers, if we're being totally honest. Primarily, Chance the Rapper, another Chicago-based rapper and MC who really just has had so much more mainstream success and relevance than Smino ever has. And that's not really fair, because Smino has always been a fairly adventurous and forward-thinking guy in terms of both rap, singer-songwriter stylings, and soul overall. And now that most of his peers are out of the way, again, namely Chance the Rapper after he fell off big time with The Big Day when that came out, it's now, hopefully, Smino's time to shine, and thankfully, he manages to live up to those expectations to some extent at least. Look, there certainly are some stumbles along the way, I'm not going to deny that, but Love for Rent is still a solid effort from Smino, and one that will hopefully gather more attention for him than he has in the past, which hasn't been all that much, really. Smino himself is a good performer as always. I mean, hey, he still isn't the absolute best in the world in terms of general delivery. He isn't the most consistent rapper out there at the moment, but at the same time, he has a strong lyrical side to him that definitely saves any potential faults that he may have as an actual performer in terms of, again, delivery, in terms of flow, and with a more distinct and direct flow, he easily could be one of the best MCs out there at the moment, but for the time being, due to his slight lack of confidence in terms of what he's actually doing when he's rapping, he's merely very good. Smino primarily manages to stand out due to his smooth tendencies in combining neo-soul with a more straightforward Chicago trap kind of sound, and although that doesn't necessarily sound like the most creative thing in the world, there have been artists that have done that in the past, no one does it with the same level of integrity and general quality as Smino does. It's easy to mess that up by putting too much of one genre in and not enough of the other, or vice versa, but at the same time, Smino manages to find this nice balance that not a lot of other artists can say they can. Smino's production on Love for Rent is also quite good as well. It's in a manner minimalistic and heavily pop-based, but at the same time, despite its lack of ambition in comparison to predecessors like Black Swan, it succeeds for what Love for Rent is trying to do. It feels like the musical equivalent of an open field in the middle of a nice, somewhat breezy summer's day that just happens to be also a Chicago-based trap album. So take that for what you will. It won't be for everybody, and for some it will lack a level of depth that they may be looking for, especially compared to previous Smino works, but at the same time, Love for Rent is trying to be its own thing. It's trying to be distinct from previous Smino albums, and it does so successfully, and I would argue in a way this is his freest sounding album to date, though certainly not his best. Unfortunately, a major fault throughout the entirety of Love for Rent is the features, which just ultimately don't add up to much, and if I'm being totally honest, drag the album down a bit. Now look, there are a couple of solid guest verses here from the likes of Lil Uzi Vert that are very nice overall. They work well in their respective songs, they don't necessarily blow the listener away or anything like that, and they certainly don't manage to top anything that Smino himself is doing on the same song, but at the same time, it works out well. But for every decent feature, you have 3 or 4 other features from the likes of J. Cole or Raven Lenae that just feels disappointing in the most shocking way possible. I mean, you would think that with this type of production style, those two aforementioned artists in particular, but really anybody that's featured on this album would be able to beautifully complement it, but they just don't and fail to actually do anything of substance, ultimately dragging down their own songs. Look, call me a over-expecting fan of Smino or an over-expecting fan of any of the artists that feature on this record, but if you have J. Cole or Raven Lenae featured on a song, I expect J. Cole or Raven Lenae to deliver some genuine quality work. I'm not expecting it to be Cole's best verse of all time or Raven Lenae's most beautiful vocal work of all time, but I expect them to deliver something that's at least slightly memorable, but unfortunately they just act as these sort of filler passages in songs that feel like wastes of time that just are solely put there to pad out the album and add a little bit of extra time in there and also a bit more star power. If anything, I think that this record would have been a bit more interesting if it were exclusively a Smino effort. While some would certainly argue that it would become a bit repetitive after a while, this is probably one of his less ambitious albums, and as such, it would be interesting to see him going exclusively by himself here, to see how much he can really just kind of hold himself in a setting where he isn't being super ambitious or somewhat conceptual or super open-hearted or anything like that. He's just doing something that's a bit more of a vibe-worthy record overall, and I think it would have been interesting to see just how long he could really hold himself in the ring before he kind of gets knocked down by the inevitable opponent of repetition. But nonetheless, the features aren't absolutely terrible. It's not some Jay-Z on Monster level god-awfulness here, but at the same time, they aren't good either. So, overall, Love for Rent is an enjoyable album to be sure, and I quite like it, and I think it's a nice addition to Smino's discography, even if I only think it's recommendable to previously established Smino fans, or people looking for some just chill, vibe-worthy music. And overall, I will say it's slightly disappointing considering it does feel like this is kind of Smino's time to shine, considering none of his peers are really on the same level that they once were a few years back, but nonetheless, if this is what he chooses to offer up to the listening world, then so be it, because this is a pleasant record nonetheless that I do recommend you check out if you are interested. I'm going to give this record 3.5 stars out of 5. With that being said, that's the end of this review. I've been Zane from the Infinite Jukebox. Thank you for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one.